I'm going to talk about working with product managers today. So how many of you are actually product managers or POs? One? Welcome, Sarah. Great. So a few words about me. I'm a dad and also a brewer, so that's why it's really interesting to be here. There is some overlap with brewing beer. I work at Scout24, that was mentioned. I'm also a trainer at the Product Academy with Tanya Lau, for those who know her. And I'm too old for TikTok. Not going to mention my age. And yeah, if you want to keep in touch, LinkedIn is the place. So the first thing for me that's important is to understand each other's missions and responsibilities. So I know it's risky to start the talk with asking the audience, but you all had some gin, right? So it should be fine. So maybe, what do you think, like what is your expectation? What is a mission of or a main responsibility of a product manager? Maybe the PM can start. Just kidding.
To be the gatekeeper for the tech team and the stakeholders and shape the product and vision and strategy.
Thanks.
Can you repeat that?
So being a gatekeeper for the product team, right?
Tech team, yeah, in general, and
yeah.
Stakeholders as well.
So protection from the stakeholders, right? Anybody else?
I see it more as a role connecting business with tech and design. Yeah, connecting the three.
Yeah, connecting business, design, and technology, right?
The CEO of the product.
CEO of the product, yeah. Right, so what I did is I did some workshops at Flamatt and also in the beautiful city of Ho Chi Minh with our teams there. And so the method was to ask them, what is your mission and responsibility, and what do you think is the other role's mission and responsibility? And what we came up with in the end was this, that's like the constant rate of it. So yeah, as a PM, you should understand the customer needs, our business, the market, and our capabilities, and then prioritize. So that was like the main thing. And then also define and measure success. And I think what you said is the facilitator role. Both of you, I think, mostly mentioned that. It's like to facilitate the team and also protect the priorities, right? Somebody at the New York Product Conf, I don't know who it was because it was in a tweet, said that the PM's job is not to make all decisions, but to make sure that good decisions get made. And I think that's pretty spot on. So for UX or product design, I think it's understanding the customer needs, the business and the technical basics. I don't think you have to be like a pro in the technology, but you have to understand how things work and what's possible. And then design feasible solutions. And yes, that's solutions, not just interfaces that serve the needs of the business. And also you should advocate for user centricity. Also found a nice quote from Eames. So effective designers have the ability to recognize constraints and work within them. Then there's something that I think happens a lot in teams is bad communication, right? So oftentimes the PM is seen of this kind of communication hub. So everybody who has a question goes to the PM, and the PM then has to talk with all the stakeholders. And I really don't like this model because it makes the PM a bottleneck, and it keeps the PM from doing their actual job, what was mentioned before, right? So I think it's everybody's responsibility to involve whoever makes sense at any given point. So PMs have to talk to the right people to come up with the right priorities, and also UX has to talk with the right people to come up with the right solution. And what I also see in mostly dysfunctional teams is this thing about decision autonomy, right? The team should decide, should own the decisions. And what I see on one hand when a team is dysfunctional is that you have this, let's vote on everything and we're a democracy and we decide together on everything. And it's also easy to hide behind decisions, right, if it goes in this direction. And the other extreme is, like, I don't care what everybody else thinks, this is my thing, so I'm gonna decide it. And for me, that's really bad patterns. If this happens, it's a sign that something is not good in the team. So the ideal is something in the middle, right? You understand the constraints and make decisions that factor in all the relevant information. Another super important topic for me is trust. And trust has a few different facets. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just a few things. So at the center of trust for me is empathy. You need to understand the other people's problems, their challenges, in the business, but ideally also really as a person, because they are as real as your challenges. They really are. I know it doesn't feel that way, but it's the truth. And that's the basis for all trust, right? Also, trust isn't binary. It's a gradient, right? If you have the feeling that either I trust this person or I don't trust this person, it's going to be really hard to build a trusting relationship because it's not like a digital switch, right? And connected with that is trust is also contextual, right? You don't have to trust a person for everything. So I couldn't find by who this quote is anymore, but yeah, I think it's pretty spot on, right? So challenging people is also important, and I think that's super easy if you're in a trusting environment, right? You can challenge design decisions as a PM, and it won't be a problem as long as you don't try to overrule them. And as a UX designer, you can also challenge priorities, but also stick with them once it's decided. And then there's this thing I like to call transactional trust in teams. And this goes something like that. So left is the leader side and right is the team. And leader, it doesn't have to be like a manager. It can be a lateral leadership like a PM role, right? So what you give as a leader is inspiring goals and autonomy for the team. And what the team gives you back is transparency and accountability. So transparency about what they're working on, like what goes well, what doesn't, if you're late or whatever. And also accountability, really own what you're doing. Then the model, I hope this is understandable. I never presented this. So the model goes something like this. You have the leader on the left side, and how much of inspiring goals and autonomy is given, and the team on the right side with transparency and accountability, right? And if both is low, you have low trust. And you can't just go full on from the beginning, right? You have to build that. So it goes something like this, right? One side starts, and the other one gives more until you have a high trust environment, right? And if new people join the team, it can get lower again, and you always have to keep an eye on that. So what really doesn't work is this, right? If you give all the goals and all the autonomy at once, the team's going to be overwhelmed. It's going to be difficult for them to keep up the transparency and accountability. And it's going to be a frustrating experience for the leader, but also for the team. And this also doesn't work if you give all the transparency and accountability, but you never get any autonomy or any goals. This is not going to work well. So as soon as you have unmatched trust, it's super important that you bring that up. Talk with the PM, talk with the team, talk about the situation. So the next thing, I called that chapter, Everything is a Product, because I see like the principles we use in product are mostly the same we use for everything. So I mean, this event is a product. You see the setting, the nice location and everything. So I see all the things that we do basically as a product. So what that means is you have to point or know the needs of who you talk with, know your audience, and then talk to them in a way that's understandable to them or they can relate to. So if you talk with a PM, talk business, right? Yet the PM should know that you also understand the business. So you have to understand the KPIs, you have to understand return on investment, and that doesn't only have to be money, right? There's different kinds of return. You have to understand how you make money as a company, the mechanics of the market. You have to discuss trade-offs openly and also discuss risks. So about the last two things, there's a model I like to use for that. You often have speed versus risk trade-offs, right? You want to go fast, but you don't want to take too much risk. And many discussions I see between PMs and UX are basically around that, but they often don't really say it like this. So that's where this model comes in, and I think it does help. So what you can ask yourself is, what is the worst thing that could happen if this goes completely wrong, right? Will we bankrupt the business, or will we just lower the conversion rate by 0.5%, right? So it's always a spectrum, right? And it's usually not in the very extreme. The other question then is, and how much time and effort should we invest to reduce this uncertainty, right? Before we actually launch it, find out what impact it's going to have. Jeff Bezos calls that one-way and two-way doors. So one-way door is when it's a decision that can't be turned back, and a two-way door is when it's easily reversible. So the model then goes something like this. You have this, what's the cost of this thing going wrong? And on the other side, you have how much you should invest. And the green part, I like to call that the smart zone, because that's where you should operate in, right? So if you have a very high risk, you should invest a lot. And if you have very low risk, you should invest zero or close to zero, right? Just launch it. Doesn't matter, you shouldn't spend time reducing risk. And then you have the stupid zones, and they are vast. So the one side is you're moving too slow, and the other stupid zone is you take too much risk. So I think it's not like obvious, of course, and it's a matter of your perspective, how you assess the situation, but it's a good model to talk about it. So often when a designer says, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with going live with this, it's actually about this, right? He thinks we're taking too much risk to take live, and if you talk about it like this, it's easier to understand for both sides. Also, an important point is design products and not screens. I see many designers doing the thing, doing all the flows and everything, but then what they present is actually pretty screens, because they think it's what people want to see, right? But if you only present pretty screens, people will see you as a person who makes pretty screens, right? And they will not see all the work you've done and everything that's gone into it. So start there, start the discussion there, and make sure people understand that you do more than designing pretty screens. So talk about a process, right? So I guess you all know the double diamond, yes? So just very quickly, problem space, solution space. First you try to understand, then you prioritize, synthesize, then you try to ideate, come up with a good solution, design it, validate, implement, iterate, and then in the end you hopefully have an achieved outcome, right? So the input is a desired outcome, goes through problem space, solution space, and you have an achieved outcome in the end. Of course, it's not linear. You sometimes have to go back to the previous space and so on. You all know that game. So especially if you work in a product org and not in an agency, you have something before that, right? You have to decide what kind of outcome do we actually want. It's what I like to call the strategy space. So that's where you decide, okay, what is the thing that we feed into the problem space, right? So if you work in an agency, that's usually done by the customer, and you don't get to talk about this, but it's something that every company does in some way or the other. And I think it's also important to do diverge and converge in the strategy space as well. So Here you basically have the input. So for every diamond you have inputs. This could be market trends, technology, competitors, new technology, right? So group strategy could be something, but of course the list goes on, and it's also specific to your business. And then you have the goal of the first diamond is to get an overview of all potential topics, and that's usually way too much, right? You have like shit ton of ideas what you could do, but you have to decide, right? So the second part is deciding on what's important now. So what do you want to feed into that problem space, right? And what should come out of this is goals or objectives. It could be OKRs, whatever system you're using. Here, the most important thing is that you really, really have to prioritize. I see that again and again, that there are too many topics. Everything sounds great, so we do everything at once, and in the end, you do nothing real, right? So in the problem space, I'm not going into detail here, so understand all facets of the problem, and then make a hypothesis about it, and then you basically have approaches in the end, how you want to approach the problem, and here you come up with possible solutions, and you try to achieve your key results, and you iterate and iterate until you're done, or move on, right? So when we look at who's involved in which phase of each of the diamonds, so I call this one director of product. It really depends on your org. It could be a head of product management in small companies. It could just be a PM. It could be a PO. It could be somebody in the board. Really depends on your org. But it's basically the product person who decides on strategy. Right? So fully involved and responsible for the strategy space, and only somewhat involved in the problem space, and not at all involved in the solution space. And then you have the PM. If the PM is more senior, she will also be involved in the strategy space. But the PM actually really owns the problem space, right? You really have to understand the customer needs, and you really have to prioritize. And then in the solution space, it's more of a facilitator, and yeah, she doesn't have to be involved in actually delivering outputs. And UX, what's special about UX is UX is fully involved in the problem space, but also fully involved in the solution space. So UX really is a link between those two spaces, right? Engineering is mostly involved in the solution space, but of course for all roles, if you are more senior, you should be involved more to the left, right? The more senior you are, the more you should be involved in strategy and also as an engineer in problem space and so on. So what you don't want is having handoffs between the different phases of the diamonds, right? You don't want to hand off like somebody understands the problems, does research, and then, okay, here's my research paper, you go with that, and then, okay, this is the approach, now you do a solution for that, because if you do that, things really get lost in translation, right? So that's where the UX role is super crucial, because you are connecting problem space with solution space, because you have a big responsibility in both spaces. So I think that's an important role that the UX designer has in a product team, and also helping the PM connecting these two spaces. So that's the last slide, pretty on time, I think. So to summarize, it's know your and your PM's mission, and make sure you agree about it. So if you don't, have that talk, have that workshop, it really does help. Then building trust is a priority for everybody in a team, and should be. Talk business with the PM, understand your business and talk about it. Design products is the obvious one, and also know that you are the link between the two spaces. That's it. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, is it now or at the end? Now. Okay, you can also, please, if you have feedback, scan the code. We'd be very happy about feedback. And
thank you very much.
Thank you. Snap, snap. questions, remarks, things you don't agree with? Yes.
Actually, I have one question about the strategic part. You said that the director of product is responsible for that, or like something that happens before the UX designer. Do you think that, talking about design operations, that we have some space there as designers, maybe not only as designer, maybe as a head of design, but having also a stack there?
So the question is, should design be involved in strategy? But you're asking a product designer, so yes, absolutely, of course. No, I think it's actually a trend in the industry. You start seeing CDOs, so, C-level design people. You start to see many VPs of design and so on. So yes, I think design should be strategic, absolutely. Yes?
I really like your idea of designers being sort of having the link between the problem space and the solution space. What do you think is most essential for them in enabling skill set, tools, whatever?
So if one is more...
Or just what helps them to be that link?
So what helps the designer to be the link between problem and solution space? So I think I call that full stack designer, right? If you do research and you also are good in ideation, like design thinking or whatever methodologies that help for ideation, and then are also interaction and visual designer, you have the skill set, right? But often you start somewhere, right? If you're like coming from psychology, you usually start with research, or if you're a visual designer, you start from the other side. But yeah, in the end, it's I think the goal is to have a good T-shape there, and you're never going to be awesome at all the disciplines, but you still can connect them, right?
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Last one.
Sorry. Do you have any war stories about trying to convert people that do not align with that particular thinking, and speaking about PMs mostly, into building more of trusting relationship with their teams and with the stakeholders?
Wars.
Does that help?
So the question is if I have any real life experience in convincing PMs that this is the way to work, right? So what really helped me is actually doing these workshops, right? Like bring that on the table and ask about the understanding of their role, what they see as their role, what you see as their role, and what they see as your role. Make that transparent and discuss it. The workshop I did in the city of Flamatt was with a team that they were really not sure about each other's responsibility, and it was kind of broken, so yeah, it was not in a super good state. And the workshop was super helpful there, because people finally talked about what they think they should be doing, and there were many unspoken assumptions that got cleared up pretty easily in the workshop. So that's a way I would try, maybe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.